we'll have this available in many different ways after. We'll have it available to anybody who registered, FLOM's YouTube channel, and also on our Grow blog, which is a weekly blog for the Gospel Weeklies. I know we have a lot to go over in this short amount of time. We should end in around 70 minutes. And I'll introduce Kathy in a moment. Kathy will present on this topic. We'll have questions. You can use the chat to ask your questions, and we'll provide some product information as well. And then at the end of questions, we'll go over some product that FLOM and Bayard, our parent company, offer for RCIA, adapted for children, and also we'll mention just something about RCIA in general and all our resources. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Kathy Coffey. Kathy, if you don't mind introducing yourself, just very grateful to have you and have you write for us and author for us in this new wonderful resource. I actually got my first copy yesterday, the journal, My Path to Easter, which is a journal for youth as they go through the RCIA process. So Kathy, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome to all of you. Congratulations that you are embarking on an adventure here that will take some courage and won't be the easiest thing you've ever done, but maybe the most rewarding. Let's begin with a definition of the rite of Christian initiation adapted for children. It is the process of welcoming unbaptized or uncatechized children into full initiation in the Catholic Christian community. Now that's the official definition, but let's, if I say nothing else that you remember, I would say this is the most important thing, that our goal here is for children to fall in love with Jesus and to continue a lifelong friendship with Jesus. So it is Jesus who draws them. We do our best, but in the end, it is ultimately God's work. Now, just a little of the historical background. Vatican II restored the catechumenate, and these were ancient rites. We have records of a little boy called Euphemius being initiated in the 4th century. And they began it with for adults, which became a worldwide source of renewal in parishes. And then more recently, within the last 45 years, for children. And many of you are here today, so it still has life. If you want, and actually you probably should, read the rite itself. Numbers 36 to 251 are the sections on adults, and then numbers 252 to 330 are for children. If there's something you don't find in part 2, you look in part 1. As in any initiation, this begins by bonding with a group. Just remember how you met your best friend or spouse or partner, how you learned their favorite foods, what their favorite movies or books were, what stories they told, their family, their culture, how you learned about their quirky sense of humor. That is the parallel for this process of initiation. And I just want to qualify that where I can give a broad overview here, I can't speak to differences in individual dioceses. My role is like the cheerleader. I just encourage you, and then you take the model and adapt it to your own communities. So we will begin by looking at 3 crucial building blocks. We could have that slide. Okay, so we'll begin with personal conversion here. The rite has a profound respect for the child's spirituality. And this echoes everything that we have researched about children's spirituality. that they have thought long and hard about some of the questions that concern the finest human minds, that the child has a deep hunger for God, an insatiable love that can be filled only by God, who is love, not by human parents or catechists completely. The children's spirituality is grounded in the here and now. They are very concrete minded. Their senses are on full alert for stimulation. Children's spirituality, and I think this is heartening, isn't necessarily proportionate to their environment. So in other words, the child of atheists could more profoundly be drawn to God than the child of practicing Catholics. So what the rite speaks of is a conversion developed in proportion to age. And what that might mean in terms of a child is a sense of belonging, making their own the values and images of the Christian community, longing for Jesus and Eucharist. So the slide that's up now is the sorting of the fish, which is how many of the catechists refer to it. That in this process, we may have children who are unbaptized, preparing for full initiation. So they would usually receive baptism, confirmation, and the Eucharist at the Easter Vigil. There are, of course, many variations on that theme. Then a candidate is one already baptized in another Christian tradition. And they would prepare to make a profession of faith and celebrate confirmation and Eucharist, also probably at the Easter Vigil. The reason to differentiate the two is that we respect the baptisms of other Christian traditions. We would never repeat those. Now, the age range is generally 7 to 17. You might have a mature 6-year-old who could fit in. You might have a 17-year-old who would be better off in an adult group. But roughly, that's what we're dealing with. Children who, for whatever reasons, and we're not going to go into those now, have not been on the traditional track. I will also follow the usage of the rite by calling them children, although I realize that you may have junior high and adolescent young adults in your groups. So let's look then at the next slide about the catechesis. What's the best way to approach this? It is not academic. It is geared to intimacy with Jesus. So what this means is that some of those old approaches have not been terribly successful. The grades and the quizzes and the grouping by grade level as we do in schools. This can be a whole lot messier. And I understand that you will have people approaching you saying, we just want to get the sacraments, preferably by Friday because grandma's coming to visit. You will then perform a balancing act that will make you look like a skilled trapeze artist. Because what you're doing here is balancing both respect for the sacrament and a welcoming attitude to people. The response, which many parents aren't going to like, is it takes as long as it takes. And it's understandable why they don't like that, because they're used to 4th grade is 9 months, soccer season is 3 months. But when we're talking about transformation, you can't put a calendar on that or a timeline. And so this is not a quick fix. It is slow and messy and inefficient, and it is the work of grace. Now for the shameless huckstering, you can also get the parents this journal, because then they too can work through the process with the children. They will probably learn as much, if not more, than the children do. The rite echoes the Acts of the Apostles, where the controversy was over circumcision. And they said people should become Christian with no undue burden. with no undue burden. So let's bear that in mind. And also that at the rite of election, when the question comes up of what do they know or what do they need to know, these are the questions that the celebrant will ask. Have these children shown themselves to be sincere in their desire for baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist? Have they listened well to the Word of God? Have they tried to live as faithful followers? And have they taken part in this community's life of prayer and service? You will notice that never in there was, did they pass a test? Have they gotten to chapter 12? Which is pretty much like the first disciples. I don't remember Jesus ever testing any of them. So let's go on to the next side here, where we use the word apprenticeship, which I think is a wonderful one, that they should be surrounded by people living the Christian life and are so impressed by them that they want to do that too. Like the little boy who said, this parish packs lunches for the homeless on Sunday, and I want to be like that. Next slide, please. So again, the child is not the object, but the child becomes an active participant. And the next slide. In order to achieve this, we use a catechesis which is lectionary based and liturgical. In other words, formation by story and symbol. When you think about the way that Jesus taught, he didn't write a dissertation about divine providence. He gave people the image of the lilies of the field. That's hard to top. He knew that his audience wasn't educated. And so he would tell a story with a one-line zinger ending. And then immersion in symbol, because as we know, our ideas are less important than our images. It's our images that stick with us. And some research says many Catholics stay in there for the smells and bells. They may not be well versed in the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, but they love the smells and bells. And so that's why we have these quotes about liturgy and catechesis going together and being the best form of catechizing the children. And so each week's session is based on the Sunday gospel. Next slide, please. Then the other important thing here is that it's not what we give the children, but who we give the children. I really love that quote from the Rite of Baptism. The Christian community welcomes you with great joy. And usually the presider has outstretched arms. Notice it's with great joy, not with judgment. We're not saying, where were you 3 years ago? Or why didn't you do this when they were infants? We're just glad they're here. And we know it's not going to be without glitches, but we welcome you. And then this is a very interesting quote from the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, number 254, that the children's progress in the formation they receive depends on the help and example of. Now I'm going to stop there. And you would think with most church documents, they would say, oh, the clergy and the sisters and the catechists. No, it's the other 10-year-olds, their companions, and the influence of their parents. So let's talk about that for a minute. The Rite is extremely interested in the parents being a part of this process. We know that no institution can have more than 10% of the influence that the family has on the child. So the parents are primary, and at first they may come kicking and screaming, but eventually they may really get into this process. So one thing that we recommend is having them talk to other parents who have already been through the process. Having another family as a sponsoring family that knows what this is like, knows all the doubts and questions and fears that may come up. And then the other recommendation of the rite is peer companions. So this might be a group of children in a religious education class, or with older children, you might look to the parish youth group. With the adolescents, you might look to the Newman Center at a local college. All of those are possible places for sponsors and peer companions. Look too for the grandparents in the parish. Maybe they live in Tucson and their grandkids are in Boston, and they'd be happy to companion a child. This doesn't require a PhD in theology. It might mean they take them out for a hot chocolate after Mass. It might mean they listen to some long rambly stories. It might mean entertaining their questions. But this is the community that surrounds this child with warmth and support. Next slide, please. Now, you may wonder how the process is structured. And so this is a slide from the journal, which in which the children fill in the different periods, but we've done it all here. And so it begins with a period of pre-catechumenate or inquiry, and I'll talk about each of the periods in a minute. And then between each period is a rite, which is a bridge. And children get the idea of bridges. It's concrete, they can understand that. The bridge, they've done it for brownies or Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, wherever that is. The bridge takes them from one period to the next. So after the pre-catechumenate is the rite of acceptance. Then after the catechumenate, the rite of election. After that, the period of purification and enlightenment, which often coincides with Easter. Then the full celebration of the sacraments, and that's generally at the Easter Vigil. And then mystagogy, the period which follows. I'd like to go into just a little more depth on each of those. So if we could have the next slide about pre-catechumenate. Yeah, this is simply the asking questions phase. It may or may not go on to the next phase. But in this, we develop friendships. We introduce different prayer forms. And most of all, we elicit people's stories. Who is God for them? How do they see Jesus? You may get some surprising responses there. But the model for the church at this point is the listening ear, reverently inclined towards the child. Then for the next period of catechumenate, this becomes much more deep, more intense, because the question is, do I want to become a follower of Jesus? And so during this period, they'll break open the scriptures again on hopefully on a weekly basis. And they'll go through the rites, which I'll describe more later, but the blessings, the laying on of hands, the anointings, possibly the presentation of the Creed and the Our Father, although that can come a little bit later. And participation in the community's life of service. Now, you might ask, how does a 9-year-old make the world a better place? Well, we want to get that attitude sown now, like a seed, that yes, they can help recycle. They can help clean up after the pancake breakfast. They can help unload the dishwasher when mom is exhausted. They can read to a little brother and sister. These may seem like small things, but what we're doing is establishing an attitude that they are part of a community that serves others. Then in the next stage, the purification and enlightenment, we are now more intensely preparing for the sacrament of initiation. And so a deepening relationship with Jesus, continued prayer and service. And notice I'm never saying they gotta know more stuff. It is not about information. But we are sensitizing them, as the drawing shows, to the symbols. And what are the scripture stories of water? What is water in your own experience? And we don't tell them a lot about what's going to happen, but we sensitize them to the symbol of water, which is very important throughout the Old Testament and Jesus's life. And then finally, the period of mystagogy. This comes from a Greek word which means the mysteries, and it originated because originally becoming a Christian was very dangerous. You could risk your life, and so much of this was kept secret. They really didn't know until they were immersed in the water and doused with the oil what was going to happen to them. And so it's so much at once that it takes time to absorb all that. And that's the purpose of mystagogy. We look back on the Easter Vigil. We talk about that. We process these symbols here of the fire, the oil, the bread, the water, the touch, the white garment. It's looking back and looking forward. Now, you'll notice that never is there any hint of graduation, because what do people do after graduation? They leave. What we want here is a lifetime commitment and ongoing learning. And the hope is that by now they will have become such fast friends with Jesus that they'll want to know more, that they'll want to continue this search for a lifetime. Okay, the next slide, please. I want to spend some time on prayer in this process. And so the key acronym here is keep it short and simple. Sometimes I hear these lengthy graces before meals and think that had to have been written by an adult in a library surrounded by other adults. They simply don't know what it is to sit around a table with hungry kids, and grace needs to be short and swift. I would also mention keeping it concrete. So for instance, here's a very simple one that you might use in a pre-catechumenate. You have the children help gather some beautiful shells or pine cones or pebbles. You place these in a basket. And then the children are gathered in a circle. You pass the basket around, and as each person takes an object out of the basket, they thank God for some blessing that they've received that week. Probably that week, just to keep it fresh. And then you pass the basket back, and they return the object, asking God's help with some problem that they face that day or that week. It keeps it short, it keeps it participative, and it keeps it concrete. So none of this, adult hammering on and on and on. We want the children to be participating. And next slide, please. This just translates our traditional prayer forms into kid language. Wow, praise, whoops, contrition, thanks, gratitude, and gimme, petition. I think a lot of us focus on that last one, but really the traditionally all four are the ones that we want to be introducing. And again, it's not going to be perfect. I keep saying that, but next slide, please. We know a lot now about different personality types and different learning styles. And therefore, what works for Sally might not work for Susie. And so what we want to do is introduce them to the whole smorgasbord. And that Catholic tradition is rich in different prayer styles. We have everything from Liturgy of the Hours and Lectio Divina, the more scripture-based, to dance and music. That's how some people pray. To the Eucharistic liturgy, to the silent private prayer, to small group prayer, or with children, completing the sentence. One thing I wonder about is, or one thing I'd like to tell God is, let them finish the sentence. Next one, please. So they're learning all of our traditional prayers, the sign of the cross, etc., the grace before meals, the Hail Mary, but also that if we talk about a relationship, Relationship needs communication. So private, spontaneous prayer, listening silently to God. And that might be, help with my math test today, or a moment of quiet. These children live in very noisy worlds. We do them a great service by introducing a moment of silence. And you can start with 30 seconds, build up to 2 minutes, but it's very centering and grounding for them to have quiet. And then the next slide, please. Yeah, in terms of the rituals, and I've kind of categorized them here. One scholar says that this is the church's response to the child's longing to be touched by the cosmic mother. Now, you will remember that whenever Jesus healed, he touched the person. And so that's why when we bless the child, we touch the forehead. Maybe we make the sign of the cross on the forehead. And it can be very simple because we want to encourage the parents to do this at home. In Spanish-speaking communities, they do this all the time when the child's going off to the playground or off to school. And so it might be as simple as touching the child's forehead and making the sign of the cross and saying, "May God go with you today." Then these can be done in the small group, the catechetical groups, so that the parents learn to do it at home. The anointing is done with oil and perfume. We want to make them fragrant. And what this builds up to is the Easter Vigil, where they will be anointed lavishly with a fragrant oil. And as one child said, that oil was really expensive, and it showed that I am really important. As one expert says, where else do we treat children and adults the same way? Same with the laying on of hands. It's a gesture of support. And as the person who probably best introduced the RCIA in the United States was Father Jim Dunning. And I'll always remember the motto he gave us: if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. So there are going to be some goof ups with this. Don't worry about it. Next slide. People wanted some ideas for retreats, and I only have a little time. Hopefully we can get more time later, but 2 ways to approach this. One is by basing it on the scriptural theme of that liturgical season, so that you might begin with a song, then the readings from that gospel, prayers, rites, and activities all relate to the Sunday gospel. Let me just do a quick one on the Feast of the Epiphany. So you might begin by singing "We Three Kings Orient Are," although that is not scriptural, but anyway, everyone knows that one. Then read from a child's book the story of the visit of the Magi. And then a homily where we maybe talk about and I mean discussion more, what we talk about. An epiphany means a breakthrough where we suddenly see something. Have you ever had that happen? And tell us how that went. And then what dark forces are there in your world, like Herod's murderous thugs? Some children know about gang violence. They're in touch with shootings in their neighborhood. So let's talk about some of those dark forces. And then how does the star guide us? Or how does the light of Christ come to bear on that? An activity might be making a mural of the three kings journeying to the crib, or an activity might be dramatizing the gospel, have them act it out. Finally, they can make luminarias and use those in the final prayer service. And the final prayer service might be a blessing where we ask God to bless these children and bring light into dark worlds. Now, depending on the amount of time you've got for a retreat, you could also base it on the period of the process that they are in. And of those 4, I just chose one, the catechumenate, so that, or I'm sorry, the pre-catechumenate leading up to the rite of election, in which they are called, they sign their name in the book. And for that, there are lots of scripture stories. For instance, the call of Mary at the Annunciation, the call of the fisherman. And we might talk about how do you feel called? You could certainly sing the song, "We are called, we are chosen." Read about the calling of Matthew or the Samaritan woman. And then, what does this gospel call you to do? Again, some reflection time on that. And thinking about, here's my gift, here's how I could use it. And that could close with a laying on of hands, where we ask God to look kindly on the efforts of your children and name these children and strengthen them. Now, again, I know that the question's going to come up, how long does it take? And let's say roughly a year. For some people, it's 2 years. It's really hard to put a timeline on this. But I think it might be good now to pause and see if you have questions. And I'm not quite sure. Are they going to raise their hands, or are these in the chat, or how do you want me to address questions?
Kathy, they'll need to use chat because there's too many people.
Okay. And
some people were asking about the how long a program's, and we answered in the chat that it was it really depends on the child and the situation. So it could be 1 year, more than 1 year for the process. Do you want to comment further on that?
no, I believe I already said that. I said some for some years, depends on the individual.
Kathy, there's a question in chat. Could you explain if or why RCIA should be a separate program from RE, or should it be incorporated into the RE program?
Well, I don't know your situation in your parish, and you may be strained for staff and resources. Ideally, it is a separate program because, as I said, it's about transformation. It's not about information. I would think that in an RE program, they are probably getting more information because children at this stage have already been catechized. They're in grade school or junior high. Children coming into the RCIA process might have no background at all. And I think we want to be really careful not to embarrass those children. There's the famous story of a little boy who heard the story of Good Friday for the first time and said, "Then why do you call it good?" Well, see, they don't know how the story ends. And so we want to be really cautious about keeping them with supportive peers.
Yeah, I would add to that, Kathy, that I think what also helps, like you said earlier, it depends on the situation and the child. Maybe it's someone who has been a part of formation, but either wasn't baptized, or maybe was baptized but never anything further, or
Right.
stopped out for a while. So maybe they could go into the regular formation, but also be part of an RCIA, the part of the RCIA process. I think it all depends on the parish needs. That's why you're saying about adapting to the situation. I think that's exactly it.
Right. Sorting the fish.
Kathy, here's a question. Would you suggest the class be divided by younger students from the older ones? And would the books and resources be different?
What we tried to do in the journal was make it adaptable for younger and older ones, so that while there are places to write responses, there are also places where they can draw those for children who are not writing yet. The idea of the journal is for them to take ownership, so that it's not just all blah, blah, blah from adults. Some people have had great success with putting different age groups together. Now we're talking maybe a third grader and a seventh grader. So they kind of bond together and help each other through. You know, we never learn anything as well as when we're teaching it. And so it gives your older kiddos some chances to also learn by teaching. And so again, I think it depends a lot on your numbers, what kind of staff you've got. That's why I said you're doing this marvelous acrobatic balancing act. So all I'm seeing in the chat is a list of states that.
We also have the children receive the sacraments at Easter Vigil and celebrate the rites as normal throughout the year.
Yes, some parishes have an ongoing all year process. Other parishes find it's really hard to staff that in summer, and so they do follow an academic year. But it's really hard when someone approaches you in May, all enthusiastic, to say, well, you got to wait till September. So some parishes have a pre-catechumenate team that works during the summer. Again, people have found creative ways around this. I would guess that the reality in most parishes is starting in the fall and leading up to the Easter Vigil in the spring.
Another question was, I see where you're coming from, but the challenge is getting them to come back for ongoing formation as part of mystagogy, rather than having them leave once they receive the sacraments.
Right. And that's a huge problem for the adults as well. The statistics are not good on this. But again, I think there's a lot we can't see, you know, and there's a lot of God's grace at work here. And how do we know? Maybe they're doing something wonderful. You know, maybe they're going out and being the next Greta Thunberg and saving the planet. I think we kind of have to let go of our notions of success and leave it in God's hands.
Amen.
Thanks. I wanted to show the journal. And it's important, and Kathy mentioned this during the presentation, that the journal is not catechesis. It's really to accompany the child through the process. The ongoing catechesis, if you are having them learn about the faith, we encourage, of course, to use the Gospel Weeklies, because as the Directory of Catechesis, as the new Directory of Catechesis says, liturgical catechesis, lectionary catechesis is kind of coincides with the RCIA model. So we feel it's a great fit together. So if you were having the child participate in ongoing formation, whether it's in a large group or a separate group, they can use the Gospel Weeklies. They can use it for the breaking open the Word at the dismissal, after the dismissal rite, or on a separate night or at home with the family, however. And you can order samples of the Gospel Weeklies for that. The journal really is whether you use the Gospel Weeklies or any other formation program to accompany the child during the process. So all the different rites. Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything more about that, but that's really what this is for.
David, could you show a picture of one of the pages in the journal where there are faint lines for a child to write on, but they're so faint that somebody who wishes to draw in that space could do so?
Sure. I'm sorry if I don't have the PDF up, but you can see in a case like this, so there could be drawing or writing. And when maybe the page is a little bit above level for maybe the younger children, we have notes on those pages that say catechists, sponsors, and parents. Younger children may need your help completing this page. So there's a note there on that page. In the inside cover, we have a QR code that actually you can download an adult companion guide. So it really is for, just like we were saying about accompanying the child through the process, is a guide to help them through this journal as well. And it's available in English or Spanish, and it would be right on the inside. It's a free download to help the parent or whoever else is working with the child on this journal. We also have the journal available in a bilingual format. So it's all Spanish on one side, and you flip it over, and it's in English on the other side.
David,
then-
there's a number of questions coming in here. Can you comment on the age level of the journal?
Well, maybe Kathy, you want to speak to that? I mean, we, as you said at the beginning of the presentation, I mean, as early as maybe age 8 or so, 7 or 8 would be the lowest level. We have it really geared for, I'd say, ages 8 through 12, because in most places the teenagers would go through the RCIA process with the adults, or there may be a separate resource for that. We started with this journal. If we find that we should have something younger, or maybe do something a little older based on the feedback we receive, we're happy to consider those things as well. But the sweet spot, I'd say, is in the maybe the grades, 3 or 4 through 6th grade level. Kathy, I don't know what you think about that.
I just want to add that those the pages for the adults are free, and that gives the adult tips on how to adapt to the particular child, because you also might have a 12-year-old whose reading level is 1st or 2nd grade, yet many children for whom English is a second language. And so I think that's why we did want to put a hard, fast age on it. Because again, we don't want to embarrass them if they're reading at a lower level, but the adult who's working with them can adapt that.
Kathy, there's also a question is, where do you work in going to confession for the catechumen?
You know, I have to say that in all the literature on children's initiation, there is not much about that. And I think it would probably be considered not a super high priority. All of our emphasis is on the welcoming and the, you know, how wonderful you are, what a precious child of God you are. And throughout the rite, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't read anything in there about confession.
Interesting.
The Gospel Weeklies, some people are asking about the Gospel Weeklies. They're set up at 5 levels from pre-K through grade 9. So what's great about that is you don't have to be grade level specific. You could have combined classes, you know, or sessions, or have them sent home. If you have a 2nd, you know, and 3rd grader, they could be using the same level. You really could adjust the program to your needs, and your local sales representative is the best person to contact to custom build your program, whether it's just for ongoing formation in general or how it's tied to RCIA.
There's a question about how do you choose or find student companions, and actually we don't use the word student, we use the word companion. And I think, you know, you can identify the kids in the class that are a little more outgoing, maybe extroverted, and would make good buddies. They are not necessarily the kids who get A's in religion, but they are part of welcoming families, and their parents don't mind adding one more to the dinner table. Their parents don't mind taking one more to Mass. And they learn a lot about their faith as they try to explain it to the child who's being initiated.
Just follow up on one thing on the reconciliation question. I think there's a difference between teaching them about the sacrament and the need for the sacrament, because obviously if they're being baptized, there's no need for the sacrament reconciliation prior, because that's addressed in the baptism itself. Some has suggested maybe during mystagogy that there's a discussion about how to go to confession. I would add, just like you would do anything else, maybe that's part of being a part of the parish life, whether it's receiving the other sacraments, going to church, going to a prayer service, reading the bulletin, or participating in something. I think all of that would be part of what mystagogy could include. So I did want to mention that. Joan, maybe you should post the other resources. We can quickly go over that. And well, actually, before we do that, I take that back. Erica Diarchidi, our bilingual editor, was going to talk about the bilingual journal just for a moment, just to say something about how that may differ or the adaptations that were made for that. So Erica, if you're able to do that now.
Yes, thank you, David. Well, on the translation of the journal into Spanish, as Kathy mentioned, the format is bilingual. First of all, that is very important because sometimes we have children that feel more comfortable learning or writing in English because that's what they do in school. But as we know that the progress they made in this process has a lot to do with their families and their family support, we want also to have the Spanish there in case their families are not very fluent in English. They can share with their parents, grandparents, sponsors, everything that they're learning and the experiences they're going through in the language they feel more comfortable in. That is one of the advantages of having both languages available in the same book. Now, for the translation itself, we always try to go not word by word or not translating, even though that would be correct. We incorporate the culture and we take that into account when we do the translation. We took all the vocabulary, all the terminology from the Rite in Spanish that we use here in the United States. It's not something that we translated word by word. And I think that is very important so the children have the same language in Spanish in their journal and in their lessons if they use the Gospel Weeklies that they're going to hear in the Gospels or they're going to read in the church documents later on. So that's something we try to be very careful with. And I think it's a great resource to have and to incorporate the families in the process of the formation of the children, to have this bilingual available in Spanish for families and English at the same time if the children feel more comfortable with that.
Great, thank you. Joan, if you don't mind putting the resources up now, we can walk through some of the other things that are available. So you see the covers, and this is what the adult companion looks like. Sorry, Joan. It's very simple resource. You could save it as a PDF. You can print it out and share it with your families, however it suits you. But again, the guide has a QR code where anyone could scan this and download the guide. Next slide, please. So we spoke about the and we feel that this is the best option for ongoing formation, whether it's during or after children participate in RCIA, and primarily because it's liturgically based and it could be used even during the process as part of the breaking open the Word. That's probably the best, I'd say one of the best ways to use it during the RCIA process. And you can, again, contact your sales representative for samples of the program if you don't already have or use the program or have samples. And it can be used in a variety of settings. It could be used in a traditional classroom model. It could be used in family or home study, small group study. And again, your sales representative can really walk through the program with you, and you can determine what the best way is to offer the Gospel Weeklies in your parish. The program follows the liturgical year, so the 3 cycles. And as we know, during the 3 scrutiny weeks in Lent, Sundays in Lent, anybody using the or part of the process times, in that case, well, 2 out of 3 years, the lessons that we offer every year don't line up with the scrutinies. So online, we offer free downloads for the years we're not printing those lessons, and they're available right on our website for those who use our program. So if in year B, you're going to be using the year A readings for those 3 Sundays, you can download the lessons for those 3 Sundays of the scrutinies. We also offer a little overview about using the Gospel Weeklies during the RCIA process. And then for each week's lesson, we have a correlation on how to adapt, how to utilize the program within the RCIA process. And that's also available to those who use our program. Some other resources that we provide are weekly gospel videos. They're 5-minute gospel overview, kind of a homily with a saint spotlight or saint of the week and a closing prayer. And then we also offer coloring pages for every Sunday of the year. So for those younger children, whether they're in RCIA or not, you can use these coloring pages that tie to the gospel theme of that week. Children Celebrate is a different program than the Gospel Weeklies, and it's used for Children's Liturgy of the Word, but it too could be used for breaking open the Word. It has a leader's guide that's wonderful on how to walk through talking about the readings. And then there's a leaflet that's a 2-page handout for each week that can be done as part of breaking open the Word or part of Liturgy of the Word with children, and then or sent home to do. And there's also a link on that leaflet to watch those weekly videos that I just spoke about. And new this year also, we have 4 small books that can accompany a child as they prepare for sacraments, whether it's RCIA or even just First Communion or child receiving communion who's maybe a little older than the traditional 2nd or 3rd grade. So covering 3 sacraments and then one covering the liturgical year itself. This is a great resource for any child, really. It's an introduction to the faith. It's called My Little Catholic Encyclopedia. It's done more like an FAQ, a very fun look at the church, talking about different things as you see the little bullet points on the left side. And we were very happy to receive an award from the Association of Catholic Publishers for this resource. For those not necessarily needing baptism, although this does cover baptism as well, it's not labeled as such in the program. We offer as part of our Sacramental Prep program, the confirmation combined with First Eucharist. So this is meant particularly for those dioceses or parishes doing initiation sacraments in the restored order with confirmation and Eucharist either most likely at the same Mass. It does also have a lesson on baptism. So you really could use this as another piece, another option as part of your RCIA process. This will be available in the fall. We have a gospel for young Catholics covering all 4 gospels along with other information about the faith, such as prayers and practices. It's an illustrated, a gospel book. So it has all 4 gospels complete using the Good News translation. And then we have certain stories that are highlighted even further with more illustrations. This is great for every child. It's also good for in a classroom setting to use it as on display at a prayer table. Every family can have one at home. A great resource for children. The Sunday Missal for Young Catholics is a very popular resource. It's offered every year, starting with the first Sunday of Advent, like most yearly missals would be. And it has all of the readings for every Sunday throughout the liturgical year, along with also, again, like similar to that what we did for the Book of Gospels, prayers and practices as well, as the order of Mass and all of the readings with illustrations that are appropriate for, I'd say, the intermediate levels for children. Available from our sister company at 23rd are several other resources for the catechumenate, for RCIA for ongoing formation. And this is one example of that. Planning for the catechumenate for children. And those are all our resources. Maybe Terry or Jennifer, is there anything else you'd like us to include or mention?
David, did we cover everything with the Gospel Weeklies in terms of on the RCIA, what do you call it, tab? So because there is things like other pages to kind of reflect on the gospel each time. That's always a good option for that.
Mention that, yes.
There was a question earlier that Kathy might be able to want to respond to, was where in the process would you use the journal?
Oh, I would use it from day one. To the very first page is welcome, and what questions do you have? You're about to be looking at a new group. Have you ever joined a new group before? And what was that like? And do you have any fears? Do you have any hopes? And then carries them through the whole process. So I would use it throughout.
So I would want to point out that David, I don't know if he mentioned this, but the cover on it is kind of a heavier cover so that it will last. It's not like a flimsy paper cover, so it'll last throughout the whole process.
And be a lovely memento afterwards.
Yeah, I do want to mention that we include a certificate on the back cover that could be used also. Somebody mentioned about the Catechist guide, but we do have, as I mentioned earlier, we have an adult companion guide, which would serve, I guess, if you want to call it a Catechist guide. If you download using this QR code, you will get that for free.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Huge thank you to Kathy for the time you put into us today. We are very grateful for you and your ministry, and blessings on all of your ministries. Thank you so much. And we also know there's a Gospel Weeklies road trip with Jen and Dave on August 10th. That's coming up, that you may have seen some things on that coming out as well. Thank you so much, and everybody have a great day.